Thank you very much. I'll sit in order because it is easier to manage the slides. And first of all, let me thank Nico and Ricardo for inviting me here, and Ricardo for his nice words of introduction. As Ricardo said, I'm a fiscal policy expert. Did my career in public economics, so I know very little about environmental economics and about the environment. So I hope you will forgive me if I'm going to say words which may sound imprecise to you. I will focus on the economic implication of climate policy, and I will go through some slides to make me more easily understood. So where are we? Well, I mean, I'm very quickly summarizing. Well, this is global temperature, you all know about. This is about CO2 emissions, the billion of tons which we at the world level emit every year. And just look at the year of the Kyoto Protocol. I mean, still, it's a very long time ago, and still the quantity of emission is still increasing. We have, as you know, the recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change provided a new outlook, and I don't have to recall the main conclusions and indication. That is, on a trend basis, we expect a significant increase in temperature. And I copied this picture about the impact of the increase of humidity and the risk to human health, but I think you all know about that. This is what we should do. A few days ago, the IMF released the October fiscal monitor, together with the outlook for the economy. And there is an interesting chapter about the fiscal implication of climate change, which I would suggest you to have a look at. This is one of the charts. And again, I think you all know about it. I mean, this we have to radically change the quantity of gas emissions in the coming years. The faster, the better, and the faster, if we are faster, we can keep global temperature within certain level. If not, things are going to be very difficult. The cost of inactions are going to be very large. I'm quoting here a few sources, but again, I mean, these are warnings that you all know about. I always find it particularly interesting the way William Nordhaus selected his words. I mean, there is a risk that we go back to the Stone Age in case temperature would get out of control. The impact of climate change is also becoming more evident in our daily lives. I mean, the month of September was perhaps the hottest as far as we know. And there are a number of indications reporting here the daily sea surface temperature in the North Atlantic. And you can see that 2023 is really peculiar here in terms of temperature. One important point is that the impact in the different regions of the world is going to be very different. This is a chart pointing to the area that would be more severely hit in terms of GDP, per capita GDP. And obviously, the impact will be greater in Africa, Central and South America, southern part of Asia. Now, the point to keep in mind is that this is going to create tensions. This is going to create migration flows. And this is going to create tension at the world level. When a big number of people move in the world, when they did in the past, we had tensions. So this has to be kept in mind. And then there is the issue of adaptation versus mitigation. This would suggest that some spending on adaptation might also be useful. Then how to balance the two, well, this is an open issue. Which are the obstacles to reducing emission? I mean, so if there is a consensus among the scientific community, I would say very broad consensus. I mean, there are only very few outliers, I mean, thinking in a different way. So what obstacles do we have in front of us? I think the first one is, as far as I understand, the core issue, which is technology. We need to reduce the carbon intensity, the energy intensity. But if we look at the past, shifting from one source of energy to another source, it took a lot of time. So look at coal, crude oil, natural gas. To change technologies in the real world, in industry, traveling, consuming, consumption, this is going to take time. And now we have some technological constraints. We were discussing it earlier. We don't have airplanes flying on batteries. So what do we do about that? Avoid flying, well, it's a possibility, but so technology, I think, is the first problem. The second problem, the cost of transition. Decarbonization is associated to costs. I mean, we are going to throw away some machineries, cars, technologies. We are going to see displacement of workers. This area of Italy is, let's say, an area where a lot of companies work for the car industry. And if we are going to change the engines from petrol, diesel to electricity, for some of these companies, there will be no future unless they change what they produce, which is not a simple thing. So managing the transition is going to be very costly. Third issue is the impact on public finances. This chart is copied from the IMF report published a few days ago. The report is basically about the impact on the public sectors on the fiscal side. And they carry out some estimates about what is going to happen to public debt levels in the future, assuming that countries are going to introduce carbon taxation, quite sizable carbon taxation. And the net effect will still be a substantial increase in public debts. For developed, advanced countries, the definition, the increase by 2050 will be between 10 and 15 percentage point of GDP, assuming a sizable resources from carbon taxation. So this is another issue. Another problem is that of the distribution of the adjustments. we know that those who are mostly contributing to emissions right now, China, India, other emerging countries, are not those who contributed most in the past. So there is a discrepancy between the distribution of flows and stocks of emissions. So, and obviously, emerging countries are arguing that you did it in the past, the advanced country did it in the past, let us do it now. So this is, again, another obstacle to moving ahead. Several countries like Italy, but I would say most advanced countries are in a demographic transition. The demographic transition implies an more public expenditure. These are some projections by the European Commission. So we are going to have to manage the demographic transition together with the climate transition. And both of them are going to be costly because we're going to spend more on health and pensions and more on the climate transition. Again, this maybe is manageable, but still, this is not going to be easy. Then there is the issue of what took place over the past couple of years, the increase in energy prices, especially gas, natural gas prices, the impact of the war. This led European countries to go for security. And also because we had to ensure that electricity was still, electricity was still available. So for instance, in Italy, we restarted again some coal power stations that were phased out. This is a temporary solution, but still. And we are spending money on importing gas from new areas, not from Russia. So again, this has been at least a short-term, temporary obstacle, I would say, to the transition. I think one issue underlying the discussion on the climate, but not only about the climate, it also applies to demography, the demographic transition, to public debt, is how we balance the current and the future welfare in designing public policies. That was, I think, Nico alluded earlier. Now, as economists, we usually talk about the intertemporal preference rate, which sounds a bit a theoretical issue. But then, if you look at economic literature, you find two positions, so suggesting a very low discount rate, even a zero discount rate, meaning that the welfare attributed to those living in the future is considered as important as the welfare of we living right now. Ramsey has that position, but you find that position also in the Stern report. I mean, they used 0.1% as a discount rate, arguing that exactly that. On the other hand, not discounting future monetary amounts is equivalent to not recognizing that we have a productivity improvement years after year, generation after generations. So the risk is to, if the discount rate is too low, is to overburden the current generation. And then if you look at the Nordhaus reply to Stern, there you see the two discussing about this issue. Obviously, what is really important is, apart from economists discussing theoretical issues, is what policymakers do. And there is literature of public choice, political economy, pointing to the fact that in democracies, policymaking frequently penalizes the future. I mean, obviously, democracies are a must. I mean, I'm not saying that we assume that democracy is the best way to manage our politics. But several studies point to the fact that the decision-making process, because it's based on elections, it provides the policymakers signals which may suggest them to take decisions which would affect positively the welfare of those living now, or the voters, and penalize future people, future voters. And there is some nice quotes here. Then there are some economists who have been saying, look, in certain dramatic circumstances, the traditional cost-benefit analysis where you set a discount rate should not apply. Pigou himself, you can see the quote, said that if these consequences are catastrophic, then we must get out of cost-benefit analysis. We must simply ensure that onboard generation are defended. That is what Pigou said. And William Baumol, liberal, saying, okay, let's the market work. But if you come to what is called irreversibilities, then the government has to step in and act. How to make policies more long-term oriented? I mean, in fiscal policies, this is one of the core issues for fiscal experts. And basically, there are three solutions. First of all, increasing information available. That's the reason why most countries provide medium and long-term projections of deficit, debt. Second solution, assign certain rules, certain tasks to technical institutions. In many countries now we have fiscal councils monitoring fiscal developments. The European Commission also at the European level carries out that role. Third solution, introducing procedure rules which make it more difficult to overlook medium and long-term considerations. Sometimes they work, sometimes they do not work that well, but still, this is a potential solution. So in the climate policy context, we are also moving along those lines, but there is room for improvement. If you look at the IPCC reports, they are public, but they are not well known. I mean, if you ask the people walking in the street what is the IPCC, even if you ask top policymakers what is IPCC, you would not get an answer. So I think there is a room for improving the scientific information to the public and to policymakers. The role of technical institutions, financial regulators are playing a certain role, but maybe we may consider having a more powerful national or international agencies dedicated, tasked with the climate transition. Third solution, that of rules. Okay, we already use some rules. Think of rules applying to car emissions. Think about the ETS system in Europe, very much important. Maybe we should also improve the solutions and think of a new solution. Maybe we don't have a global authority, for instance, a global agency dealing with climate change. Here, there is, I'm quoting, I think Karen knows all about that, this quoting an interesting case of the ruling of the German Constitutional Court, with which judges provide a ruling in a lawsuit against the Federal Climate Change Act, and a few young people complained that the act was not ambitious enough. And the court said they are right because their future will be endangered by having to carry out a too big adjustment when they will be grown up in the future. So this is an interesting case of a constitutional court entering the debate. Whether this had an impact in Germany, this I don't know, maybe Karen may say a few words about that. Another economic issue underlying this debate is the fact that global temperature, as we all know, is a global public good. Public goods, as we all know, are non-rival in consumption, non-excludable in consumption. They are a case of market failure. The price mechanism does not work, so there is an incentive to free ride. You need a government intervention. The specific case here is that global temperature is a global public good. So you don't need one government to act. You need, in principle, all governments to agree, cooperate, and act together, which is not a simple thing. Defining a global response is complex. We saw that on the pandemics, about the pandemics. There is an issue of sovereignty. We still work on the so-called Westphalia principle in international law. I mean, each country is sovereign in its territory. So this is the fact of life. So, so if one country does not want to contribute to reducing global emission, what do we do about that? Then there is the issue of looking at flows or stocks and the issue of emissions incorporated in imported goods. How to reconcile sovereignty with global welfare? There we have two ways. I mean, international voluntary agreements. We have a success case, which is that of the ozone layer. I mean, it worked. In a few years, the scientific view was translated into the Montreal Protocol, and the Montreal Protocol actually worked. Now, we don't talk any longer about having an ozone problem. I mean, it's but this was a more smaller, I would say, issue in comparison, much smaller issue in comparison to global warming. In terms of global warming, we had a lot of progress. If you, IPCC is working since 1988. We have the yearly COPs. Sometimes they're more effective, sometimes less effective, but still it is a yearly meeting in which governments are obliged to discuss about the issue. And then we have some countries, most countries setting targets, quoting a few targets about the year in which they will reach zero emissions. I mean, then maybe some targets are not ambitious enough, but still, if you think it's a lot of progress in that, I mean, because years ago this was not on the agenda, I mean, this still. Now the issue is to reach the target and, if possible, to anticipate some of them at least. The G20 has, I believe, an important role. In 2021, Italy chaired the G20. One of our priorities was to reintroduce sustainability and climate issue in the G20 agenda. Why the G20 is important? Because it is a manageable group of countries. At the United Nations level, you have about 200 countries, and it's very difficult to reach an agreement. At the G20 level, I wouldn't say that it is easy, but it is easier, I would say. And I'm quoting some of the G20 statements of 2 years ago, and you can see that, at least in principle, the 20 countries agreed on a number of, I would say, lines of action. The second way to reconcile sovereignty with global welfare is that of climate collapse. There is a recent literature on climate collapse. The idea is that a group of countries set some targets, and they also set sanctions on the other countries, sanctions that would work via tariffs on imported goods. The CBAM, European Union CBAM is that, I mean, it belongs to this solution. So far, I mean, we are still, I would say, experimenting climate collapse. The European Union is the first operational one. We will see whether things will work. And the G7 a year ago, with the German presidency, supported very much the idea of working on a climate club, either at the EU level or the G7 level, or possibly both. The EU strategy is basically that of a climate club, reaching climate neutrality by 2050. The EU is trying to balance growth and sustainability. This, you can see that in all documents. And for the reason Ricardo was mentioning earlier, I mean, if you go for no growth, you suggest that you don't want to grow, that this is not going politically to take you very far. So combining growth and the fight to climate change is the way to go. So far, the Union has managed to reduce very much the carbon content of each euro of GDP. Quoting here some of the action of the Union, Next Generation EU, Repower EU, the reform of the ETS system, and the CBAM operating from October this year just started. What are the tools available for policymakers? Well, I think we all agree that there is a need for for several lines of action: research and development, new technologies, carbon pricing, regulation, public investment. Carbon pricing is maybe the most politically complex, difficult, because from an economic point of view, it provides nice neutral incentives to everybody. There's Pigouvian incentives, fine. It also provides revenues, source that kept the budget nearly balanced in the IMF exercise, but obviously source paying more for energy either at the household level or at the company level. They are not going to be very happy about that. The IMF estimate that by 2030 we will need a global carbon price of at least $75 per ton, and then rising very much afterwards. Financial market can contribute in a number of ways. Financial regulation can help, both microprudential regulation, macroprudential regulation. And then, as you know, green bonds are now issued on a larger scale. So, conclusions. First point, the climate transition is going to be very costly, both for the private and the public sector. In many countries, it overlaps with, as I said, the demographic transition. So this is particularly complex for the fiscal policy. So when one looks at climate policy, one also has to keep in mind the demographic side and the management of public debt and the fiscal side. In the IMF report that I was quoting earlier, they talk about a trilemma, saying that we have climate goals, fiscal sustainability, and political feasibility. So policymakers to keep in mind these three aspects and trying to develop a strategy coping with them. Then we know that in all dimensions, this applies also to pension reforms, to public debt and environment. Timely action and prevention are more effective and less costly than late emergency measures. We also know that the impact on income distribution, both within countries and across countries, will be significant. And this may create tension either at the national or at the international level, which should be kept in mind and managed. I think that the transition is primarily technological, and then we have to work either by incentives, research and development, investment. International cooperation is the key factor, and the G20 can have an important role. Climate clubs may represent in this regard a second best solution. Obviously, a worldwide agreement solution would obviously be preferable and more efficient. Last slide, how to make the future more important in policymaking. This is an issue, as I said, important for the environment, but also important in many other regards, in fiscal policy in general. In the case of the environment, I think there is a consensus view among scientists, and it is crucial that this is conveyed to policymakers, to the general public. There is a need for more education about sustainability because policymakers react if there is a demand for certain issues. So if there is a demand for sustainability, policymakers will react to that. And demand can exist if people are informed, if people are worried about what is going to happen to themselves or their children or grandchildren. The decision-making process in democracies often leads to relatively high discount rates. So how can we try to modify that legislation, procedure, technical bodies? Not easy. Finally, we need, I think, to improve the analysis of the options which are in front of us with alternative strategies, the costs and benefits of alternative strategies. Think of the role of natural gas in the coming years. I mean, can we switch it off in a few years, or would it be efficient to keep it running and maybe compensate it with carbon capture for some time? The role of hydrogen, the role of nuclear. What is nuclear? Is it green or is it not green? The current nuclear, the new nuclear technologies. I think there are a number of issues which are still open for discussion. So I will stop here.